Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
a decision has been made of a special military operation.
Russia launches a wide-scale invasion of Ukraine from multiple points of attack as Ukrainian citizens pray for peace.
Putin chose this war.
Plus the latest on the invasion from the co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus.
It's like very personal for me.
Also, Chicagoans with family in Ukraine want their neighbors here to pay attention and to act.
There's not a lot of people to express yourselves to.
An organization is working to tackle the roots of violence. We are live in Roseland.
Meet Andrea Kirsten, new leader of the city's Police Accountability Agency.
The beauty of the SHIELD test is that we can catch the virus sooner.
An exclusive look inside the massive COVID SHIELD testing operation in Illinois.
Brandis and Paris, as you mentioned, I'm in Roseland as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Now, located in Chicago's South Side, neighborhood leaders are engaging in block-to-block outreach to battle gun violence. Others are working to bring private and public investment into a corridor that was once a hub of businesses. We'll speak with residents and some of those leaders coming up. But first, I send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Joanna. And now to some of today's top stories. The Pentagon orders 7,000 more troops to Europe after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but President Joe Biden says they're going to support the United States as NATO allies.
Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power.
And we'll have much more about the invasion of Ukraine throughout tonight's program. Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown says there's no evidence of misconduct surrounding the traffic stop of a high-ranking official. Internal Affairs Chief Yolanda Talley's niece was pulled over earlier this month while driving Talley's car. The car's passenger was arrested for heroin possession, but the car was not impounded. Brown says he's waiting for a third-party review.
As soon as we heard about the incident, we immediately forwarded the circumstances to the Inspector General. There's no evidence of any misconduct by Chief Talley.
Black and Latino Illinoisans with cannabis dispensary licenses call on the courts to get out of their way after the state awarded a round of licenses aimed at so-called social equity recipients from communities adversely impacted by the war on drugs. Other license holders sued, bringing this whole process to a halt. Protesters gathered in Daly Plaza earlier today saying social equity license holders are being denied the opportunity to open a marijuana business.
Social equity was meant to be reparations, for lack of a better word, for us. We've been adversely impacted by the war on drugs. We've been adversely impacted by this TRO. Right. And now there's going to be more of us that are going to be adversely impacted because we won't be able to open because we spent so much time and so many resources that we may not have it when it's time to open.
And up next, reaction to the attack on Ukraine by Russia. So please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
President Biden today announced a new round of sanctions against Russia following that country's massive invasion of Ukraine. The president echoed.
We've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen.
The president echoed other world leaders condemning what he called Russian President Vladimir Putin's unprovoked action and vowed to bolster forces to protect NATO allies in Eastern Europe. And joining us is Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Chicago's North Side. He is also a member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and co-chair of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. We did invite all Republican members of Illinois' congressional delegation. None accepted our invitation. Congressman Quigley, thank you for being here. First of all, Ukrainian President Zelensky tonight says he is target number one. He believes he's going to be deposed. What is the latest you're hearing about the situation on the ground in Ukraine tonight? And I believe we don't have your audio.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh, first of all, the intelligence on this has been outstanding, and you probably read the administration has released much of this intelligence, including the so-called hit list, a kill list, and capture list. Obviously, as President Zelensky would be at the top of that list, and I think they recognize that. Honestly, I don't want to know where President Zelensky is or where their government is. I do. They have plans to operate, if necessary, outside of the capital. But I think the president's right. He is a target. It's the reason that Kyiv was targeted by Putin in the first place.
And as you heard, the president announced these new financial sanctions today. Is there any reasonable expectation that they could deter further action?
Well, I think they're an important component of deterrence and will have a long-term impact. As I assess what they did today, you know, it was a pretty dramatic tranche, unprecedented in some concerns. But the fact of the matter is, Russians are at complete war with Ukraine throughout the entire country. So at this time, it makes sense to sanction all the banks, sanction Putin himself and all of the oligarchs that are close to him. I believe it's time for lack of better expression, crippling sanctions across the board, including removal of Russia from the SWIFT banking system, now not allowing them to communicate a necessary function to operate in the fiscal world.
And that removal from the SWIFT banking system is being blocked by some of the EU member countries. You mentioned sanctions on Putin himself and his family. The president has not gone there yet. Do you believe the president should go there now?
You know, I do. I mean, this is war, and you know, I believe Putin should have been the first target. I don't know necessarily who's blocking the efforts there. You know, it's safe to surmise that that's the case. But I don't think there's time. Certainly, it's not necessary to wait any more time for the next tranche. You know, we have to ask ourselves, what does Putin care about? And you asked the question, were sanctions enough? Frankly, I think we have, in the final analysis, what does Putin care about? He wants to reassemble the former Soviet Union, and he wants NATO out of Europe, or the United States out of Europe, and NATO out of Eastern Europe for sure. I think it's time to give him the opposite, and I think the troop posturing and additional supplies to our Eastern NATO allies is prudent.
And you mentioned those supplies to the NATO allies, but U.S. troops will not go into Ukraine. NATO troops will not go into Ukraine. Zelensky said tonight he knows that they're going it alone here. Is there any military assistance or weapons assistance that you believe Ukraine might receive?
Well, you know, since 2014, they had, you know, 200 million. So, and you know, most recently, a significant amount more. So I think it's still possible. It's more difficult under war conditions, but I do believe it will happen. They'll get additional military assistance, lethal and non-lethal, as time goes on, both from NATO and the U.S.
How do you assess Ukraine's ability to withhold this invasion, to resist a full and complete takeover in the short term and the long term?
Sure. I mean, obviously on paper, they're overmatched. Again, when I read the intelligence on this, first thing that struck me is this isn't a trial run like last spring. Putin is going to go, and he did, and that this would be something like a modern-day blitzkrieg. Modern day in the terms of the warfare is a little bit different, the cyber attacks and so forth, but the blitzkrieg is what you've witnessed in the last 24 hours. You know, a dramatic attack from all sources, air, ground, and the sea. It'd be very tough for Ukraine to withstand this. I believe they have the extraordinary fighting spirit. They're a heck of a lot better armed forces than they were in 2014, but again, on paper, simply overmatched not in spirit, but by the full range of options, including from the air that the Russians have.
And this invasion is impacting the world economy, the U.S. economy. There have been talks of possible further cyber attacks in the U.S. from Russia. What do you think the fallout is for the United States right now due to this invasion?
You know, I think it's what Americans need to wake up and recognize. We're not insulated from this in any way. You know, I saw the polling on this, which was disturbing, that Americans didn't want us to be involved at all. The fact of the matter is you can't turn off the TV and the news and this will go away. Putin and Russia have already attacked this country in the modern warfare with cyber attacks from the 2016 election on, solar winds, the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline. You know, but that's just the beginning. If he really wants to continue this, or if anyone thinks he won't retaliate for these sanctions or U.S. involvement, you know, they're mistaken. So I think there's a real threat to our banking system, our grid system, and so forth. And Putin has also made noises, and he seems to have become even more extreme about some of the old Cold War threats coming back to life, putting hypersonic missiles in Cuba and Central America. The economic thrust, I appreciate. The war itself will make the flow of energy and resources out of Ukraine and Russia very, very difficult. There are precious resources there that are involved with the production of everything from aerospace to semiconductors. So we have supply chain problems now. They will almost certainly get worse.
A lot of interconnected issues here. You know, the last 24 hours have been very unpredictable. What do you think the next days and weeks look like?
I think, unfortunately, more of the same. You know, as Putin advances, it's clear that his intention was decapitation, attack Kyiv, remove the government, put a puppet government in place, and sort out the rest of it as time goes on. You know, I think he imagines what will probably happen is he would have a quick takeover of the Ukrainian military. That was certainly his plan. And then have to deal with what would probably be an insurgency after that. But again, I don't want to rule out the efforts of the Ukrainian military. But it will be a horrible onslaught, the one that we've already started to watch, of very innocent people.
Troubling time right now. And as you mentioned, Ukrainian President Zelensky says there are already over 100 Ukrainians dead in combat, he believes, right now. All right, Congressman Mike Quigley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And now to Brandis with how Chicago's Ukrainian community is responding to the Russian invasion. Brandis.
For some Chicago area residents, what's happening in Ukraine is personal. They've got relatives suddenly living in a war zone. And they're trying to draw Americans' attention to the Russian invasion, including with a rally this afternoon in Chicago's Ukrainian village. Amanda Venicky was there and joins us now with more. Amanda, what'd you see today?
Well, Brandis, among the folks that I spoke with was a man that I ran into as he was circling the area nearby the St. Volodymyr and Oha church in Ukrainian village. He was waving a large Ukrainian flag. He says that he moved to Chicago 7 years ago. And he says a lot of Ukrainians do that because the weather's similar. It's cold both here and in Kyiv, about 30 degrees, give or take, in both cities. He says he isn't complaining, though, about standing outside in that bitter cold for hours today. Says unlike what his family is going through back home, he's not worried in Chicago about bombs flying overhead.
They saw the airports were blowing, they saw the airplanes flying and missiles flying over the head, and the kids woke up this morning and because of the sounds of the explosion. So when my sister called me, I was surprised, and I didn't expect that Putin will do this. Putin, he is not pretty... He has problem with his head, I guess. If he started in 21st century the war, they coming and killing people. That's not how it should be.
Not how it should be. I obviously didn't speak with all of the couple hundred people at this afternoon's rally, but that has to be a unanimous sentiment. They called for, after these early morning attacks by Russia. Now, Pavlo Bandrusky is a leader with the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, and he says that his ancestral homeland is an innocent, democratic nation, a peaceful country that wants to live by the rule of law, only to be slammed by Russian rockets. Says the country has suffered and survived atrocities before.
Ukraine's people have selected its future, and they selected to live with the West. For centuries, Ukraine has lived under Moscow domination. They know what it's like to live in Russia, live with a Russian oppressor. They chose not to accept that. They chose to live according to Western standards, democracy, freedom of speech, the rights to have a great economic life and a life for their children and family.
For attacking that, he says Putin should be declared a war criminal. Ukraine, he says, will fight, but it needs help from the U.S.
USA support Ukraine! USA support Ukraine! President Biden promised hard-hitting sanctions. He said, cross the red line, Putin, and we will make you pay. How much more Ukrainian blood has to be shed to make them pay? Now is the time. Unleash the sanctions. Stop the war.
Representatives from the Ukrainian consulate here in Chicago also spoke and called for Western solidarity by cutting off diplomatic ties with Russia and also to come forward with weapons, also humanitarian support. The crowd sang the Ukrainian national anthem, prayed for peace, and chanted, "Stop Putin now."
It's very important how world will react right now, because Putin acts himself as a bully, and if bully get hit back, bully stop. If bully don't see any force, he don't understand any reasons or logic. He just understand force. Like if he can get force back, he will stop.
Anatoly and his wife also still have family living in Ukraine. He says nowhere in that country right now is safe. He says Ukrainians can and will resist, and they're not going to make it easy on Russia from a military perspective. But he says that it is up to the West to stand up and make it difficult for Putin diplomatically, economically, and every other way possible.
People may think that it something that happening far away, and it may be not something they should be bothered about. I had the same feeling till 2014. I never thought that I will have war in my home. I never thought that I will need to worry about how to evacuate my parents from the place where I grew up, and I can say for sure that world will never be the same if Western leaders and all world will not fight back on Russia.
He is calling on everyday Americans to get involved by calling to pressure their members of Congress to put pressure on Russia, also to contribute to ongoing humanitarian efforts. Now, there is another rally in support of Ukrainian sovereignty scheduled for that same location at the St. Volodymyr Church in Ukrainian Village. That is Sunday afternoon. Candace, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. There's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so stick around.
Thousands of Puerto Ricans are taking to the streets to protest massive blackouts.
Over the years, Mexican culture, from food to music, has become woven into the city's tapestry.
Medical professionals share the latest recommendations on COVID-19 booster shots.
DACA recipients have been facing longer delays than normal in their status renewal.
Little Village is one of my favorite neighborhoods. This neighborhood comes together to celebrate such an important day in our culture.
The city's Southside community of Roseland was once home to steel and automotive industries. With the collapse of jobs and revenue, the neighborhood has dealt with decades of economic decline. Over the years, the community has been working to turn that around. To learn more about development happening in the area, Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez and producer Acacia Hernandez spent the day in Roseland, and Joanna joins us now. Joanna.
Brian, that's right. I was told that this neighborhood was once known as the jewel of the South Side, but as you mentioned, over the years, the neighborhood has struggled to keep the community thriving because of lack of investment and, of course, the things that are happening in this neighborhood. But despite those challenges, there has been a big push to help the residents obtain those resources and get new opportunities. Now, we start by meeting with the president of the Chicago State University. Z. Scott has been the president for 4 years and says her goal has remained to help minority students attend college, especially through the pandemic.
In addition to getting our students through the pandemic, but actually getting better access to college, not only to college, through college and to complete. For example, our freshmen can come to Chicago State for free in what we call our RISE Academy. It's a comprehensive set of services that include technology, counseling, really intensive advising to really focus on that first year experience and getting that student to that sophomore year.
The university says it's launched several programs and scholarships aimed to help African Americans and Latinos with their education and workforce preparation. President Scott shares the last 2 years have been challenging, and despite seeing a decline in enrollment, she says they're rolling out resources to help students obtain their education.
But while we did see a decline in undergraduate enrollment, we saw an uptick in our graduate enrollment, and that's across the nation. We saw students who were thinking about, this is my opportunity to reskill, upskill, and really take myself in another direction in my career.
When it comes to change in the community, Andrea Reed, the executive director at the Chamber of Commerce, is on the front line. She has worked on extending the CTA's red line, helping to offer low fare rates and fight to stop the violence that's been affecting the businesses for years.
Again, we come from decades of disinvestment. We can't throw money at this situation. It's more than just fixing up a building. There are challenges that we face that go beyond money. There are lives involved here. There are people who have suffered from unresolved trauma. Hurting people hurt other people.
Leaders at Chicago Cred know all too well the obstacles people face in the neighborhood. The organization works to put an end to gun violence with face-to-face outreach, using their own experiences to help people in the neighborhood choose a different path. Outreach Supervisor Terrace Henderson says there's a variety of obstacles the community faces involving drug abuse, the increase of guns, and emotional trauma.
One of the biggest things that I really think that's affecting the communities is that it's not a lot of people to express yourselves to. Like, a lot of these individuals is holding everything that they've ever dealt with in their lifetime within themselves. And, you know, trauma don't stay within you. You know, I may be having a bad day and I don't let nobody know it. Somebody come step on my shoe, but my boiling point was at the tip. You just stepped on my shoe, it was harmless. But I've been holding this rage in from something that happened last week, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, and then it just erupted.
Alderman Anthony Beal of the 9th Ward says he's creating opportunities by renovating and bringing to life new projects that will give opportunities. One of those projects is so-called Cop House, or community-oriented policing home, to battle the violence. It's expected to open in the summer.
It's a community house. It's a place where people can go, read, learn computer literacy, learn computers. I mean, you name it, you can learn whatever. It's going to be a safe haven for the community. We're working with CRED. You know, Arnie Duncan and his organization. He's going to be working with his organization outside of the Cop House. We're going to have the city bring all their resources. So it's going to be a huge one-stop shop where we have all the wraparound services. Now, we're putting it in one of the most troubling areas in the community because we're going right to the heart of the problem. You go right to the heart of the problem. Once you get that done, then I think you're going to see the safety kind of spill out.
Down on Michigan Avenue, a donut gem has remained open for decades. 82-year-old Bert Bullock has been running his donut shop for nearly 50 years. He works 6 days a week and says his shop has become a place to decompress and indulge in a moment of sweetness.
I like making people smile, you know, and they keep coming back. They come every morning on their way to work. On their way home, they stop in for some more donuts.
And Brandis, everyone that I spoke to walking into that donut shop had a smile on their face and a story to tell. And I tried those donuts for the first time. Delicious. And coming up, we speak to Roseland Community Hospital about what they're doing to continue to provide services to the community. But first, I send it back to you.
Which means you'll be bringing donuts back when you come back to the studio, Joanna. Thank you. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. What began less than 2 years ago as a way to test students at the University of Illinois quickly turned into a major statewide operation that is now COVID testing at more than 1,700 schools. The unique saliva test invented by Shield, Illinois, has been employed as a way to prevent COVID outbreaks. And at some of those schools, the results have been nothing short of extraordinary. We recently got an exclusive peek behind the scenes. Students at the Illinois Math and Science Academy in Aurora are lining up for their weekly COVID-19 test.
Fill it up to the black box.
But these students do not have to take a nasal swab.
It's the simple matter of drooling into a tube, either with a funnel or a straw. So there's no swab in the nose or throat or anything like that. It's very easy to do. Typically, our patients are in and out in under 5 minutes.
The unique saliva test was developed by scientists at the University of Illinois, and Shield officials say it has become an essential tool in halting the spread of COVID-19.
The beauty of the Shield test is that we can catch the virus sooner, so we catch it before the patient is contagious.
IMSA President Evan Glazer says the school contracted with Shield last August when students returned to in-person learning.
IMSA is unique because we're a residential campus, and so the students are in close corridors all the time.
Not only has the school been able to stay open, Glazer says the test positivity rate has stayed below 1%, even through the Delta and Omicron surges.
Out of 28,000 tests that we've taken this year, we've had 56 positive cases, which is truly remarkable. In fact, we went 5 straight weeks without any cases at all.
Although not every school has seen that level of success, Glazer says IMSA paired the Shield testing with robust contact tracing. IMSA is one of 1,800 locations currently employing the test. 1,700 of those are schools. A team of healthcare workers from or contracted by Shield comes in and runs the entire program. It's a massive operation built by the University of Illinois on the fly.
University of Illinois put in the money. They just jumped out there, started building the labs, and it was like, we'll just figure it out as we go.
Shield Managing Director Ronald Watkins says the test costs 1/3 as much as the standard PCR test, and schools have the entire cost reimbursed with federal CARES Act money. He says the University of Illinois brought together business, engineering, and supply chain specialists to come up with a system that would produce PCR results in less than a day. This lab in North Chicago is one of 11 operated or contracted out by Shield, Illinois. Once the specimen hits the lab, it's an average of 10 hours from arrival to result. Lab Director Natalie Lubbers says the facility came online in a month. Saliva samples are sorted either manually or by robotic machines built specifically for this process.
We go through extensive review process of every single sample, not just positive, to ensure that we're releasing the best possible results.
Here, the saliva is being removed from the vial and put into a solution that will convert RNA into DNA and ultimately detect the virus if it's there.
This is what a positive sample can look like. The reason why we know it's positive is we have 2 genes, N gene and ORF1AB gene, crossing the threshold.
Lubbers says that the results are sent electronically to the patient within minutes. This process has played out more than 1 million times since Shield began. But Watkins says the goal is to eventually dismantle the organization. That means the pandemic will have passed into endemic phase. But he says the saliva technology has limitless potential for other applications.
It's everything from being able to detect a person's wellness to whether or not they've had a concussion, all sorts of different interesting uses for the saliva.
Which means spitting into a vial might one day become a regular occurrence at the doctor's office. Indeed, I did take the Shield test, and it came back negative. Chicago Public Schools is not one of the districts that uses the Shield test. The district decided to go with a lower-cost alternative that proved to have a lot of hiccups. School officials say CPS was not eligible for the full federal reimbursement of the test because it got its own round of CARES Act funding. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, troops and tanks roll into Ukraine as Russian leader Vladimir Putin warns the West against any intervention in the conflict. Mayor Lightfoot's choice to lead the city's police watchdog agency gets City Council's stamp of approval, but not without a fight. And a community hospital is fighting to stay afloat on Chicago's South Side. We're live in Roseland Community Hospital with leaders. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot outlines details for the city's Universal Basic Income pilot program. 5,000 recipients will be chosen by a lottery system to receive $500 a month for 12 months. Chicagoans 18 and over can apply if they've experienced hardship due to COVID-19 and earn less than 250% of the federal poverty level. Applications are set to open in April. Lawmakers try to address a teacher shortage in Illinois classrooms. State Senate Democrats held a news conference today promoting bills aimed at easing the shortfall, which the State Board of Education says is about 4,000 open positions. The measures would make it easier for retired teachers to work as substitutes without affecting their pension, allow subs to work for longer periods, and it would lower the age requirement for grade school teaching assistants. Courtney Goss works with students who have social and emotional challenges in Springfield Public Schools.
It's very difficult for me to do my actual job because I'm often having to sub for other teachers when they're gone because we don't have subs. This was happening before COVID, but COVID made it way worse. If we can increase the number of teachers and subs and then being able to stay longer, that would be amazing because right now we're struggling.
And hospitality workers rally in the loop, trying to get the attention of the new owners of the Thompson Center. The state chose a private developer to overhaul the much maligned building in December. Servers, cooks, and housekeepers held a demonstration outside the Thompson Center today, calling on its future owner to guarantee high-quality hospitality jobs.
Before I had my good hospitality job, I would work 50 or 60 hours a week and still not be able to pay all of my bills in a month. I don't want anyone who will work in the Thompson Center to ever feel that way.
And another round of snow for northeastern Illinois. Sorry. Steady snowfall began this afternoon and is expected to last into tomorrow morning. The National Weather Service expects 2 to 4 inches, with more possible near Lake Michigan. Freezing drizzle is in the forecast south of I-80, which could create slick sidewalks and roads. And now to Paris for more on the foreign policy implications of the crisis in Ukraine. Paris.
Yeah, Brandis, Ukrainian citizens woke to the sound of air raid sirens early Thursday morning as Russian forces began invading the country from the north, east, and south, and cruise missiles rained down on strategic military targets. The attacks began around 5 a.m. local time, shortly after President Vladimir Putin announced on Russian television the launch of a, quote, special military operation in Ukraine. Here for our ongoing coverage of the conflict actions are Yohanan Petrovsky-Stern, a professor of Jewish Studies and History at Northwestern University with a specialty in Eastern European and Ukrainian history. He signed an open letter sent by Ukrainian Jews to encourage Germany's chancellor to take a tougher stance against Russian aggression. And Alberto Cole, professor of law and U.S. foreign relations at DePaul University. In the early 90s, Cole was principal deputy assistant secretary of defense in the Pentagon. I welcome both of you here to Chicago Tonight. First of all, Professor Petrovsky-Stern, you have relatives, you have friends in Ukraine. What are you hearing from them right now?
Well, I'm monitoring the situation, listening to the different Ukrainian medias, and of course talking to my mom, who is in Kiev, and to my mother-in-law, who is in Lviv, central and western Ukraine. And I talk also to my colleagues in Dnipro, Kharkiv, and other cities. I have many friends and colleagues, and I worry about them.
And what are they telling you?
They are telling me that they are calm, that they stand firm, and they are ready to defend the country. they are indignant when they talk about the unprovoked invasion of the Russian troops into the sovereign Ukraine. And they talk from different places. Some of them are on their way to bomb shelters. Some of them are in a subway, also looking for cover. Others are at home, and there are people in the streets.
And we certainly hope that they stay safe. Alberto Cole, we mentioned what the last 24 hours have been like. What do you believe the next hours, days, weeks, months will look like in Ukraine?
I think President Putin has made it very clear that his goal is to seize all of Ukraine, to overthrow the legitimate, democratically elected government in Kiev. And so basically what he's going to do is set up a puppet government in Kiev that will respond to Russia's interests and even go further, perhaps do the equivalent of an Anschluss, the same thing that Hitler did with Austria in 1939. I think President Putin is eyeing that kind of an option for Ukraine and later on for Belarus too, which he's practically occupied. So it's an open question how hard the Ukrainian military will be able to resist. Definitely the Ukrainian people are going to fight very heroically. They're going to fight very hard. There's been a huge change in Ukraine over the last decade, just a tremendous growth in Ukrainian nationalism, Ukrainian patriotism. And they had decided, over 40 million Ukrainians had decided they wanted to be Europeans. They did not want to live or be a part of Putin's Russia. So,
I was going to say, Putin told Russian state media earlier this week that his goal was not an occupation. Clearly untrue statements there. Here's a little bit of what he said in that broadcast.
Our plans are not to occupy Ukraine. We do not plan to impose ourselves on anyone. Anyone who tries to intervene, to be a threat to our country, to our people, should know that Russia's response will be fast. We're ready to use any development. Every decision can be made.
Johanan Petrovsky-Stern, is it your understanding that this is a broader assault on the Western world order, on the concept of liberal democracy, and an attack on the EU and even the United States that clearly he clearly does not agree with the way that our countries are run?
Let me start by saying something that I believe we have to understand. Putin is mocking the international law. Putin is mocking the security situation in Europe. He's making fun of the attempts to stop him, and he basically acts as a bully and as a main dog in a pack. He says, "This is my prey. Everybody who intervenes, I will bite you. I will swallow you." This is number one. Number two, Ukrainians, and let's not forget that this is about Ukraine, and Ukrainians, a democratic country with a democratically elected president, multicultural country, democratic country that wants to be, as Alberta nicely mentioned, to be part of Europe, the country based on European values and democracy. So this country is not trying to be under Putin. This country is ready to defend itself, and Ukraine will resist. But now let's look again at what Putin is saying. He says, on the one hand, that he starts an limited military operation to occupy the newly acknowledged, the newly recognized territories in southeastern Ukraine that he and only he recognizes as independent republics. And on the other hand, he attacks Ukraine from south, east, and north. And he is launching attacks against the peaceful Ukrainian population and northern Ukrainians who are 700 miles from the place that he declared to be occupied. So we are dealing not only with a bully, we are dealing with a liar, an outward liar. There is nothing what he says makes sense and is true.
Certainly clear from his remarks on Monday, they certainly did not prove to be true. Alberto Cole, President Biden today mentioned that as a result of this, the ruble has fallen, the Russian economy is hurting, the stock market there is going down. Couple that with sanctions, does it have any deterrence impact at all?
No, not at all. Not at all. Putin is very much of a geopolitical player. His top priority is to expand his territory. His goal is to recreate old imperial Russia, to recreate the Soviet Union. And he wants to be seen as a great historical figure, as the Peter the Great of the 21st century, or as the Joseph Stalin leader in the 21st century. So these measures will hurt Russia over the long term economically, but they will not alter his calculus. His calculus is military, is political, is geopolitical particularly. And so sadly, the sanctions will not bite enough to deter him. And I think our listeners should understand that there are people out there, and Vladimir Putin is one of them, and I think Xi Jinping in China is another one, and probably the Iranian mullahs in Tehran are another group of people who believe, okay, that the only thing that can really stop them, the only thing that deters them is hard military power. And I think this is a time for the American people and for President Biden to come clean with the American people and talk about the need for the United States and its allies to strengthen our military, to spend even more money than we're doing right now, because we're facing a world in which Beijing and Moscow working together will challenge the United States, will challenge our allies, our friends. Watch out for what could happen to Taiwan in Asia over the next 4 or 5 years.
And certainly there have been some rumblings about that as well right now. Perhaps some of these actors feel emboldened. So much to talk about. We will continue to do this in the days and weeks to come. But for now, our thanks to Yohanan Petrovsky-Stern and Alberto Cole.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. And now we turn to Joanna Hernandez, who spent the day in Roseland as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
Thanks, Brandis. We're now here with Dr. Karam Khan. He is the Chief Medical Officer of Roseland Community Hospital. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
So I want to start off first, as COVID cases are winding down, what impact has COVID had on the Roseland community that has long faced with health disparities?
I think it's had a significant impact due to we get the sickest, the most comorbid patients that come in with COVID. And I personally treated patients that have poor access to health care in the community, lack of resources, lack of primary care and education that's needed for the patients. So we've had the sickest patients with the most comorbidities that come into our hospital and get treated for the COVID.
And as a doctor, how do you also keep these patients' spirits up, right?
It's very challenging, but I think that the most important thing is giving them hope and letting them know that, you know, at Roseland Hospital, we've been in front of COVID with our testing. We've had testing since the first wave of the COVID with our vaccination. And more importantly, we've had the latest treatments as the CDC has approved and FDA has approved. We've been using those on our patients that come in.
And a few years ago, Roseland was struggling to stay afloat. Where does the hospital stand now?
Well, we have funding challenges. Most recently, after the last Omicron variant, we've had issues with nursing staffing and then price gouging by the nursing agencies to where we're in debt due to mainly nursing, but also, you know, limited on resources, and we really need help from the state government and the Medicaid organizations to help fund the hospital so we can appropriately treat our patients.
Would you say this hospital is a necessity in the community?
Absolutely. The hospital is going to be coming up on its 100th anniversary in 2024, and we see over close to 35,000 acutely ill patients coming in through our ED doors a year. And with the COVID, I mean, we've seen, you know, it's been lines in the ER of sick people just last month in January, where I've had to, you know, literally see patients with the ventilator in hallways. So it's been a pretty dramatic impact.
Now, part of that effort also, I want to switch gears here, is to raise funds for the Roseland Medical District. Now, tell us about those efforts.
Yes, the medical district is, it's sort of like, I know you're familiar with the Illinois Medical District that we have, and the efforts are to bring in other subspecialties and primary care into the community of Roseland, but we cannot have a medical district without Roseland Hospital present on the table and involved in the plans, as Roseland is the hub in a medical It's basically a desert where, we provide all types of care for the community.
Now this is the last question. We only have a couple seconds left with the mask mandate uplifting. Are you concerned about there being a surge?
Not so much a surge, but definitely can be a pickup in cases because social distancing and masks are very important, along with the vaccination, to keep our cases down.
Well, thank you, Dr. Khan, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, coming up, we speak with a local organization who is assisting the youngest people in the community. Stay tuned.
Joanna, thank you. We'll look forward to hearing about that. And up next, one-on-one with the new head of the city's Police Accountability Agency. But first, a look at the weather. Chicago's police watchdog agency officially has a new leader. City Council members yesterday confirmed Andrea Kirsten, the mayor's pick to lead the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Kirsten has served as the interim head of COPA since last year, but her approval through council was mired by some months of controversy. After her nomination in November, 20 alderpeople had signed a letter opposing Kirsten due to a disciplinary recommendation of a slain Chicago police officer. And Andrea Kirsten joins us now. Congratulations, Andrea. Did you expect your confirmation to take this long?
Well, thank you, first of all, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. The work of this agency often elicits really strong responses on sort of all sides of issues surrounding police reform. So while I certainly didn't predict that my confirmation would take the path that it did, the level of public interest and engagement and strength of opinions regarding our work is certainly nothing new to me or anyone that's engaged in this work at COPA.
And today is your first day on the job as the official chief administrator of COPA. Why did you want this job?
That's a great question. So I've actually been with the agency since September of 2016. As someone who served as a Cook County State's attorney here in Chicago, and also as an advocate, kind of working in the criminal justice system on behalf of survivors of physical abuse and violence previously, I've always been very committed to service in furtherance of our systems of justice. And so, when the opportunity arose to participate in the rebuilding of this police accountability agency back in 2016, as it transitioned from what was then the Independent Police Review Authority to what is now COPA, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, I felt compelled to really come and lend my skills and expertise to these complicated issues. And I believe strongly in our systems of justice, but I'm also not blind to their brokenness, and I intend to continue being a part to contributing to efforts to improve the system so it's equitable and fair for everyone.
And one of those complicated issues is something that we already mentioned, the debate that was surrounding your appointment and confirmation. It stemmed from the inclusion of the slain Chicago police officer, Ella French, keeping her name in the report that recommended discipline for the wrongful raid on Anjanette Young's home. That report was released after French's death. And here's a little bit of that debate from yesterday.
We need to hold everybody accountable. That goes from the madam that sits at the top of that chair to the bottom person. And so I really want you all to think about, I did feel like it was insensitive when it came out because she had just died. But I did understand that it's our responsibility and our duty. I sometimes think we forget who we work for. We are paid to represent the people in our community.
And that's Alderperson Jeanette Taylor, who did, in the end, vote in favor of your confirmation. But what is your reaction to the critics who say that it was insensitive and to all that was being said about that report?
So first and foremost, I think it's always been really important, and something that I've been making a concerted effort to do is really correct the public information on the timing of this disciplinary recommendation and the release of the report. Of course, I think it should be widely known at this point that that recommendation was made in April, and the report was finalized with that recommendation for discipline against Officer French months before her tragic death in the line of duty. And the release of the report is governed, both the timing of the release and the nature in which the report was released is governed by our ordinance and FOIA laws, as well as the consent decree. So, with respect to the emotional sentiments surrounding it. I share in that. I mean, and I've made lots of public comments to the extent that I am troubled by the fact that our work in any way contributed to the further hurt of a grieving family. However, I have an obligation to, when trying to fulfill our transparency obligations, following the letter of the law that prescribes how we do the job that we do. That's what took place here with the inclusion of her name in that report months after her death. And I'm working with City Council now to revisit whether some of these rules should be or need to be changed. And I've also, made many public statements and have reached out to the police department about changing the way in which officers' families are notified about something like this. COPA has spent the last 5 years really developing empathetic processes by which we help civilians whose lives are impacted by our transparency obligations, specifically preparing them for the release of materials, making sure they have sort of the dignity to experience what's going to be made very public about their private lives, making sure they see that information before it becomes public information. And I want to make sure that our officers and their families, particularly a Gold Star family, has the same dignity afforded to them. And I look forward to working with the police department and other city entities to make sure that happens going forward.
Yeah, because, for example, you have endorsed a proposed ordinance that would redact the names of slain officers from those publicly released reports. But before we let you go and before we run out of time, since its establishment in 2016, do you think that COPA has improved public trust in regards to accountability for police officers?
I think bit by bit we're doing that, every day. Our work really has tried to focus on increased investigative integrity. That was something that the Department of Justice report in 2017 was extremely critical of with our predecessor agency. So I think, the level of detail and the thoroughness with which we approach this work has really improved, and that shows in the scrutiny that these reports receive over time, and our ability to stand up to that scrutiny. And then additionally, I think our transparency efforts are also of paramount importance in building public trust. In fact, they're a bedrock of public trust. Not everyone's going to agree with an outcome, but at least providing the public with information surrounding these critical incidents, I think is the starting place and sort of a non-negotiable for us as a city as we try to build trust across our systems of public safety.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. Andrea Kirsten, first day on the job as a brand new COPA Chief Administrator. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Up next, Joanna Hernandez with more from Roseland. But first, a look at some events happening this weekend.
And now we check back in with Joanna Hernandez, who has spent the day in Roseland on the city's south side as part of our In Your Neighborhood series. Joanna.
Now, thanks, Paris. We're now here with Diane Latiker, founder of Kids Off the Block. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I want to start off, for those who don't know, tell us about your work through Kids Off the Block.
Kids Off the Block is a community-based youth development organization. Our primary focus, though, is giving young people a safe space. We consider ourselves anti-violence, and so we try to give young people resources and tools they need to be successful, because we just want them to be able to live in a community that they believe in and that they have somewhere to go that's safe.
And how do you connect with these students? How's that process like?
Wow, well, let me say this, it's amazing. It really is that, they knock on a stranger's door and ask for help in their community. How cool is that? That is so cool to me. And that we can actually help them, so I love it. Yeah.
That's why you do the work.
That's why I do it.
What keeps, what's the passion? What keeps you going?
Well, my faith, number one, my family, and the fact that I was once young, long time ago, and I needed that support in my community. And even if it is a stranger, you quickly become friends and family through trust and care and love, most of all. And I think that's what our young people desire, or else they wouldn't come to see a stranger.
That's very true.
Yeah.
You're like a second mom in some sense.
I hope so.
Now, what impact has the pandemic had on your programs?
Well, back in 2020, when it really hit. You know, our organization, Kids Are Physical, right? We're right there with them. We couldn't do it. So we had to figure out what to do. My husband and I said, we're not going to sit here. So we started taking food to the young people and their families that we serve. The next thing we know, we're serving the whole city. We're traveling 300 miles a day across the city to bring PPE, hygiene products, and food. And when I tell you that the people were so kind, they were so glad that somebody thought about them enough. You know, and it really changed our programs. It really changed us, to tell you the truth, because it let us know the need is great. And if you could do your little part, that's a blessing, just to help somebody.
And the last question I want to ask is, you wrote a book. What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned through the kids in the community? You know, it's unfortunate there's violence that happens everywhere, but some of these neighborhoods, you know, there's a lot of challenges that happen. You know, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
That we all can do something. That's what I wrote the book for, to let everybody know. I was a mom in my house with 8 kids. I just wanted to do something.
How did you do that?
That's another story. But I'm just saying, I wrote the book so everybody would know. You don't need $1 million, a big building. You just need a will to say, I want to help, I want to do. What do you care about? That's what you figure on, you know, and that's what I did.
Well, thank you for sharing your passion and being with us here tonight.
Thank you.
And now, Paris, that's a wrap for us here in Roseland. I send it back to you.
All right, Joanna, she certainly is inspiring. Thank you so much. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.